The entire marketplace stopped to watch. Some looked at her with pity. Most looked at her with satisfaction. No one imagined they were witnessing the future queen of the kingdom. 24-year-old Aurelia Winter stood before the iron gates of the Hawthorne estate, the only home she had known since she was 6 years old. At her feet rested a single canvas bag. It was faded, patched in several places, and nearly empty. Everything else she owned had been taken. Her foster mother, Lady Evelyn Hawthorne, stood proudly on the front steps, flanked by servants and curious neighbors. "You should consider yourself fortunate," Lady Evelyn declared loudly enough for the growing crowd to hear. "We're allowing you to leave with your freedom. You stole from this family. You deserve prison." Whispers rippled through the marketplace. The moonstone necklace. "I heard it was worth a fortune." They trusted her for years. Aurelia lowered her eyes. She knew the truth. She had never touched the necklace, but innocence meant very little when powerful people had already decided who the guilty person would be. The estate steward stepped forward, carrying a small wooden box. Inside were the few keepsakes Aurelia had treasured all her life: a silver hairbrush, a hand-sewn blanket, a tiny carved wolf left by her late parents. Lady Evelyn closed the lid. Those belonged to this household now. Aurelia's fingers tightened around the strap of her canvas bag. For just a moment, grief flickered across her face. Then it was gone. She bowed deeply. "Thank you." The words startled everyone. Lady Evelyn frowned. For what? For giving a frightened little girl a roof when she had nowhere else to go. The older woman's expression hardened. "You should be thanking us for not calling the royal guards." Aurelia simply nodded. "I hope your family finds peace." Without another word, she lifted her bag and turned toward the road. The crowd parted as she walked. Some shook their heads, others laughed quietly. "She has nothing. Winter begins next month. She won't last." A little boy standing beside a bread stall tugged on his mother's sleeve. "But she always shared her lunch with me." His mother gently pulled him away before he could say anything more. Aurelia heard him anyway. A small smile touched her lips. If that was how one child remembered her, then perhaps she wasn't leaving with nothing after all. She kept walking. She didn't look back. At the far end of the street, hidden beneath the shade of ancient oak trees, stood a polished black carriage bearing no royal crest. Its curtains remained drawn. From inside, a pair of steady gray eyes followed Aurelia's every step. The man seated within had watched noblewomen compete for his attention. He had met daughters of the wealthiest alpha families. None of them had held his interest for more than an afternoon. Yet the young servant walking away with a patched canvas bag had occupied his thoughts for 6 months. Alpha King Alaric Thorncrest rested one hand against the carriage window. He watched Aurelia disappear into the busy marketplace. His expression remained calm. Only his quiet words revealed what he was thinking. "They've just thrown away the most honest woman in the kingdom." No one outside the carriage heard him, and no one yet realized that the king had already begun making plans that would change Aurelia Winter's life forever. 6 months earlier, Alpha King Alaric Thorncrest had walked through the Hawthorne estate wearing the plain clothes of a traveling grain merchant. No crown, no royal guards. No one recognized the ruler of the kingdom. That was exactly how he wanted it. Reports had reached the palace that grain meant for starving villages was disappearing before it ever reached the royal storehouses. Someone inside the noble trading houses was stealing from the kingdom. The Hawthorne estate stood at the center of those rumors. So Alaric came himself, not to inspect the ledgers, to watch the people. It was on that first visit that he noticed Aurelia. She greeted every guest with the same respectful smile. Rich merchant or stable hand, it made no difference. She treated everyone as though their dignity mattered. Most servants hurried past the kitchen with their eyes lowered. Aurelia always paused. One rainy afternoon, Alaric watched her slip 2 warm loaves of bread into the hands of 3 hungry children, waiting outside the servants' gate. "Lady Evelyn will be angry," one child whispered. Aurelia smiled. "Then don't tell her." The children laughed and disappeared into the rain. Later that same day, an elderly groundskeeper stumbled while carrying heavy sacks of grain. Without a word, Aurelia rushed over. "You've worked enough today. I can finish," the old man protested. "You've already done your own work." She only smiled. "Then I'll finish both." She stayed long after sunset. No one thanked her. She never expected them to. Weeks later, Alaric decided to test something. As he crossed the marketplace outside the estate, he allowed a heavy leather purse to slip unnoticed from his cloak. Inside were dozens of gold coins. More importantly, the purse carried the royal treasury seal hidden beneath the lining. If the wrong person found it, sensitive royal business could be exposed. He had barely reached the next street when footsteps splashed behind him. "Sir?" He turned. Aurelia stood there, soaked from the pouring rain, breathing hard from running. "You dropped this." She held out the purse with both hands. "You didn't look inside?" Alaric asked. She looked genuinely surprised. "It wasn't mine, so why would I?" He opened the purse. Every coin remained exactly where it belonged. Not one had been touched. As Aurelia hurried back toward the estate, Alaric stood silently in the rain. Captain Rowan, who had secretly accompanied the king from a distance, approached. "Should I investigate her?" Alaric shook his head. "No. Watch her. There is a difference." Over the months that followed, the reports were always the same. She shared her wages with elderly workers. She mended torn uniforms for servants who couldn't afford new ones. She accepted blame when younger servants made mistakes. She never sought recognition. Meanwhile, inside the palace, the royal council presented portraits of noble daughters almost every week. Lady Celestine would strengthen our Eastern alliances. Lady Vivienne comes from one of the oldest Alpha bloodlines. Lady Rosalind's family controls the northern mines. Alaric listened politely, then quietly set each portrait aside. None of them reminded him of the woman who had chased a stranger through a storm simply to return something that wasn't hers. Now, 6 months later, he watched that same woman walk away from the only home she had ever known with nothing but a worn canvas bag. The kingdom believed it had discarded a servant. Alaric knew better. It had just cast aside its greatest treasure. The city gates disappeared behind Aurelia as the afternoon sun sank lower in the sky. She walked without looking back. Her canvas bag rested lightly against her shoulder. There was little inside it. A change of clothes, a loaf of bread one of the kitchen maids had secretly slipped into her hands before she left, and a small sewing needle tucked into the lining. Everything else had been left behind. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stay where she was no longer wanted. The road stretched ahead through quiet fields of golden wheat. For the first time in years, no one was waiting to tell her where to go or what to do. The freedom felt strangely unfamiliar. Behind her, the sound of approaching carriage wheels broke the silence. A polished black carriage slowed beside her. The driver climbed down and bowed respectfully. "Miss Winter?" Aurelia stopped. "Yes? His Majesty wishes to speak with you." She blinked. "I'm afraid you've mistaken me for someone else." The driver looked puzzled. "No, miss. I'm certain." She smiled kindly. "There are many women in this kingdom, far more deserving of a royal audience. Please don't trouble yourself." Then she resumed walking. The driver remained standing in the road, completely speechless. In all his years serving the crown, no one had ever politely declined a royal summons. A moment later, the carriage door opened. Alpha King Alaric Thorncrest stepped onto the roadside. He wore a simple traveling cloak instead of royal robes, but there was no mistaking the quiet authority in his presence. "Aurelia." She turned immediately, and bowed. "Your Majesty, I truly didn't realize it was you." "I know." His voice carried no offense. "I've spent months making sure no one recognized me." She looked at him with quiet confusion. "I don't understand." "I think you will." He held out a small leather pouch. It landed softly in her hands. She opened it. Inside glittered enough gold coins to buy a comfortable home, a business, and enough supplies to survive several winters. Aurelia stared at them for several moments. Then she closed the pouch, carefully. She extended it back toward him. "I can't accept this." Alaric raised an eyebrow. "You've lost everything. That doesn't make this mine. You don't even know me." A faint smile crossed his face. "I know exactly enough." She looked at him questioningly. "I know you return what isn't yours. I know you feed hungry children before yourself. I know you never expect gratitude." His expression softened. "So I won't insult you by giving you something you didn't earn." Instead of the gold, he withdrew a folded document. "I have another offer." She accepted the paper. It bore the royal seal. "I need someone to help investigate corruption inside the palace." She looked up in surprise. "Surely you have experienced investigators." "I do. They're very good at questioning nobles." He smiled slightly. "They're not nearly as good at noticing what servants notice." Aurelia hesitated. "Why me?" "Because powerful people often overlook those who serve them, and people ignored are free to observe everything." She lowered her eyes, considering his words. For years, she had watched conversations stop whenever nobles noticed another noble approaching. No one ever stopped speaking because a servant entered the room. Perhaps that was exactly what the king needed. She folded the document carefully. "If I accept, I won't hide the truth, even if it leads somewhere uncomfortable." Alaric nodded without hesitation. "That's exactly why I'm asking." For the first time since leaving the Hawthorne estate, Aurelia felt something she hadn't expected. Not relief, not security, purpose. She looked up and met the king's steady gaze. "I'll help, not for the gold, not for the palace, but because somewhere in the kingdom, the truth was still waiting to be found." Aurelia's first day inside the royal palace surprised everyone. Not because she wore expensive clothes, she didn't. She arrived in the same simple dress she had worn when she left the Hawthorne estate. The only difference was that it had been freshly washed and carefully mended. Some palace officials frowned. Others assumed the king had hired another clerk. No one expected the quiet young woman to unravel a conspiracy that had hidden beneath the kingdom's nose for years. Alaric introduced her only as a special investigator. Nothing more. No titles, no explanation. That anonymity became her greatest advantage. She spent her days walking through granaries, kitchens, storehouses, and treasury offices. She spoke with bakers, stable hands, laundry workers, guards stationed at forgotten gates. She asked simple questions. How many grain wagons arrived this week? When was the last delivery to the Western orphanage? Who usually signs these receipts? Most people answered without hesitation. After all, servants rarely looked threatening. Within a week, Aurelia noticed something unusual. The ledgers showed enough grain to feed every village through winter. The warehouses told a different story. Entire rows of storage bins sat half empty. "Someone is changing the records," she told Alaric. He studied the figures. "Can you prove it?" "Not yet. But someone forgot that servants count sacks because we carry them." She smiled faintly. Numbers written with ink are easier to change than numbers remembered by tired backs. Together, they followed the missing shipments. Each trail led to another forged signature, another false invoice, another noble-owned warehouse. Soon, the investigation widened beyond stolen grain. Money intended for orphanages had vanished. Military contracts had been altered. Supplies purchased for border guards existed only on paper. The corruption reached nearly every corner of the kingdom. Then Aurelia found the document that changed everything. Hidden inside an old shipping ledger was a list of private payments. Every transaction led back to one family, the Hawthorns, her foster family. She stared at the page in silence. Alaric stepped beside her. "What is it?" She handed him the ledger. "I know these names. They're my foster brother's business partners." The king's expression darkened. "Continue." 3 days later, Captain Rowan arrested a merchant attempting to flee the capital. Faced with overwhelming evidence, the frightened man confessed. Lord Hawthorne's eldest son had secretly sold the priceless moonstone necklace months before Aurelia was accused. The money had disappeared into gambling debts. When Lady Evelyn discovered the theft, the family needed someone to blame before the royal auditors arrived. Aurelia had become the perfect target. But that wasn't the only reason. The merchant swallowed nervously before revealing the final truth. "She saw documents." "What documents?" Rowan demanded. "Shipping records." She walked into the study while they were discussing missing grain. They thought she remembered too much, so they got rid of her. The room fell silent. Aurelia closed her eyes. She hadn't understood those papers at the time. She hadn't even realized they were important. Yet they had destroyed her life to protect their lies. Alaric looked at her. "I'm sorry." She shook her head gently. "For what?" "For not finding you sooner." It was the first time anyone had apologized for doubting her innocence. The first time someone believed her, before asking her to prove she deserved to be believed. And somehow, that healed a wound deeper than the false accusation ever had. The corruption trials lasted nearly 2 months. One by one, merchants, officials, and noble families stood before the royal court to answer for years of theft. Grain stolen from starving villages was returned. Money taken from orphanages was recovered. Military contracts were restored before they could reach rival packs. Among those brought before the court was the Hawthorne family. For the first time in decades, Lady Evelyn stood without pride. Her husband avoided everyone's eyes. Her foster brother confessed to selling the moonstone necklace to pay his gambling debts. The courtroom waited for Aurelia to demand punishment. Instead, she quietly watched from the gallery. There was no satisfaction on her face, only sadness. When the verdicts were read, she simply bowed her head. Justice had finally spoken. She did not need revenge to make it louder. Meanwhile, inside the palace, another matter occupied the royal council. The kingdom needed a queen. Every powerful alpha family believed the trials had cleared the way for their daughters. The council chamber soon filled with portraits and proposals. Lord Cedric lifted the first painting. "Lady Celestine of the Eastlands would strengthen our alliances." Another advisor stepped forward. "Lady Vivian's family controls the northern trade routes." A third smiled confidently. "Lady Rosalind descends from one of the oldest royal bloodlines." Each portrait was placed before Alaric. Each received the same calm response. "I appreciate your recommendation." Then he quietly set it aside. Hours passed. The advisors grew increasingly frustrated. Finally, Cedric sighed. "Your Majesty, have none of these candidates impressed you?" Alaric looked toward the palace window. Far below, Aurelia stood in the gardens, speaking with the palace gardeners. She knelt beside an elderly groundskeeper, helping him replant flowers damaged during the recent storms. She didn't know anyone was watching. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply helping because someone needed help. Alaric smiled. "They've all impressed me." The council exchanged confused glances. "Then why refuse every proposal?" He rose from his chair. "Because I made my decision weeks ago." Without another word, he walked into the royal vault beneath the palace. Captain Rowan followed quietly. The chamber contained the kingdom's most valuable treasures: ancient treaties, royal seals, the moon crown itself. From a locked cabinet, Alaric removed a sealed document. Its wax seal remained untouched. He handed it to Rowan. The captain carefully broke the seal and unfolded the parchment. His eyes widened. At the top of the decree were the words, "Royal appointment of the future queen." Beneath them appeared only one name, Aurelia Winter. Rowan looked up in astonishment. "You chose her before the trials ended." Alaric nodded. "I did. You weren't waiting to decide. I was waiting to protect her. If I had announced this sooner, people would have claimed the investigation was manipulated to favor the woman I intended to marry." He carefully rolled the decree closed again. Justice deserved to stand on its own, and Aurelia deserved to earn the kingdom's respect before carrying its crown. The document returned to its place inside the vault, locked away for only a little while longer. The kingdom still believed its future queen would come from one of the oldest noble families. No one suspected that the Alpha King had already entrusted the future of the throne to the servant who had once walked away carrying nothing but a worn canvas bag. A week after the final corruption verdict was delivered, Alaric asked Aurelia to meet him in the palace gardens. It was the same quiet place where she often spent her evenings helping the gardeners trim roses or water young trees. She arrived wearing the same simple blue dress she had worn since joining the palace. She still refused the expensive gowns the royal tailors offered. "They're beautiful," she always said, "but these clothes still have plenty of life left." Alaric admired that about her. She never confused simplicity with lack. The evening sun painted the gardens gold as they walked along a stone path. For a while, neither spoke. Finally, Alaric stopped beside a fountain. "I have something I've wanted to tell you." Aurelia smiled gently. "I suspected as much. You've been unusually quiet all week." He laughed softly. "So you've noticed." "I notice most things." "I know." That answer made them both smile. Then his expression grew serious. "When I first came to the Hawthorne estate, I thought I was investigating stolen grain." He looked directly into her eyes. "I didn't expect to find the woman I wanted beside me for the rest of my life." Aurelia stood perfectly still. For several moments, she couldn't find any words. At last, she whispered, "Your Majesty, I care for you deeply, but I can't become your queen." There was no anger in her voice, only fear. Alaric didn't interrupt. She deserved to say everything she had carried in her heart. "I've lived beneath people who believed titles made them better than everyone else." She looked toward the palace rising beyond the gardens. "I've seen how power changes people. It teaches them to stop listening, to believe they're always right." She lowered her eyes. "I'm afraid. Afraid that one day I'd wake up and become someone I wouldn't recognize." Alaric took a slow step closer. "Then don't." She looked at him in confusion. "What?" "Don't become that person." He smiled warmly. "Be the queen who proves titles don't matter. A crown doesn't change someone's heart. It only reveals the heart they already have." He gently continued. "When I watched you at the Hawthorne estate, no one expected kindness from you. You gave it anyway. When no one was watching, you still chose honesty. When you lost everything, you refused to lose your character." He reached for her hand. "I don't want a queen, because she comes from a powerful family. I want a queen, because she understands what it feels like to have no power at all." Tears gathered in Aurelia's eyes. No one had ever described her greatest pain as something valuable before. She thought of the frightened servant she had once been, the girl who believed her voice didn't matter. If she accepted this crown, perhaps she could make sure other girls were never ignored the way she had been. She looked at Alaric. "If I say yes, it won't be because of the palace. It won't be because of the crown." He nodded. "I know. It will be because this kingdom deserves someone who remembers what it feels like to stand outside the gates with nothing." Aurelia smiled through her tears. Then, for the first time, she answered without hesitation, "Then yes. I'll stand beside you, not to rule above the people, but to serve among them." Alaric smiled, knowing in that moment that he had not simply found a queen. He had found a partner worthy of the kingdom they both hoped to build. The day of the coronation dawned beneath a clear autumn sky. Long before sunrise, people filled the streets leading to the royal palace. Merchants closed their shops. Children climbed onto their fathers' shoulders. Visitors traveled from distant villages to witness the unveiling of the kingdom's new queen. Everyone expected the same thing: a noble bride, the daughter of an ancient Alpha family, someone raised among silk gowns and royal tutors. Rumors had circulated for weeks. Lady Celestine, Lady Vivienne, Lady Rosalind. Each name drew confident predictions from the crowd. No one spoke Aurelia Winter's name. At the edge of the square stood the Hawthorne family. Lady Evelyn clutched her husband's arm. "They'll announce one of the noble girls," she said. "They have to." Her foster son nodded uneasily. A servant could never become queen. The palace trumpets sounded. The great doors slowly opened. King Alaric stepped onto the balcony first. The cheering echoed across the city. Then he turned toward the open doorway behind him. He extended his hand. A slender hand rested gently in his. Aurelia emerged into the morning light. The moon crown rested upon her head. Its silver gems shimmered beneath the rising sun. For one long heartbeat, the entire kingdom fell silent. Lady Evelyn's face drained of color. Her foster son stumbled backward. Several nobles stared in complete disbelief. The servant they had cast into the street was now their queen. The silence finally broke into astonished whispers. "It's Aurelia, the Hawthorne servant. How is this possible?" Alaric looked proudly at the woman beside him. He saw no trace of arrogance, only quiet determination. The High Chancellor stepped forward, presenting Her Majesty, Queen Aurelia Thorncrest. Thunderous applause swept through the square, not from everyone, but from enough people that the sound filled the city. Aurelia stepped toward the balcony's edge. She noticed the Hawthorne family immediately. They had fallen to their knees, not out of respect, out of fear. They expected punishment, humiliation, perhaps exile. Aurelia met Lady Evelyn's frightened eyes for only a moment. Then she looked away. Her attention belonged elsewhere, to the people. "I know what it's like," she began, her voice carrying across the silent square, "to lose everything in a single day." Many servants in the crowd lowered their heads. They remembered watching her leave the estate with only a canvas bag. "I know what it feels like to speak the truth and not be believed." The crowd listened without interruption. "So today, my first decree as your queen is this." She unfolded a royal document. "A Crown Office of Justice will be established in every province. Servants, laborers, farmers, children without families. Every citizen may bring complaints directly before independent judges. No title, no wealth, no family name will ever outweigh evidence again." A murmur of surprise swept through the crowd. Then cheers erupted, louder than before. Some servants openly wept. For the first time, they believed someone inside the palace truly understood their lives. Alaric watched Aurelia lower the decree. A quiet smile crossed his face. At that moment, he knew he had never chosen her because she would wear the crown beautifully. He had chosen her because the very first thing she did with power was give more of it to people who had none. 1 year after Aurelia's coronation, the kingdom was almost unrecognizable. The Crown Office of Justice had opened in every province. Each office welcomed anyone seeking fairness. No appointment with a noble was required. No family name opened doors. Every complaint was judged by evidence alone. At first, many doubted the system. Servants arrived expecting to be ignored. Farmers assumed no one would listen. Widows brought faded documents they had hidden for years, convinced they would be turned away. Instead, they were heard. One by one, old injustices were corrected. Land stolen through forged contracts was returned. Unpaid workers received long overdue wages. Children who had been forced into dangerous labor were placed in safe homes and schools. The changes spread farther than Aurelia had imagined. Village markets became fairer. Merchants thought twice before cheating customers. Even powerful nobles began treating servants with greater respect, knowing cruelty could no longer hide behind wealth or titles. One afternoon, Aurelia visited a small farming village that had once suffered through repeated grain shortages. This time, the granaries were full. Children ran through the fields laughing. An elderly woman approached the queen with trembling hands. "I don't have a gift worthy of your majesty." She offered Aurelia a small loaf of warm bread. "It's all I can give." Aurelia accepted it with both hands. "It is more than enough." She broke the loaf in half, then handed one piece to King Alaric, who stood beside her. The villagers smiled. Their rulers looked nothing like distant monarchs. They looked like neighbors sharing a simple meal. That evening, as they rode back toward the palace, Aurelia looked across the golden fields. "Do you ever regret choosing me?" she asked quietly. Alaric looked genuinely surprised. "Not for a single heartbeat." She smiled faintly. "I still feel like the servant who walked away carrying one canvas bag." He reached across the carriage and took her hand. "I hope you always remember her." She looked at him curiously. "Why?" "Because she reminds you that every person deserves dignity." He squeezed her hand gently. "The day you forget what it felt like to have nothing is the day you stop being the queen this kingdom needs." Aurelia rested her head against his shoulder. "I don't think I'll ever forget." Back at the palace, children were waiting near the entrance. They waved excitedly as the royal carriage arrived. One little girl stepped forward. "My mother says you used to be a servant." Aurelia smiled. "I was." The girl tilted her head. "Can someone like me become queen one day?" Aurelia knelt until they were eye to eye. "You don't need a crown to become someone great." She gently tapped the girl's heart. "Start by taking care of what grows in here." The child smiled brightly. Years later, people would remember many queens for the jewels they wore. They remembered Aurelia for something far rarer. She made the palace feel like it finally belonged to everyone. Before long, people across the kingdom gave her a name no royal decree had ever created. They simply called her the People's Queen. Many years later, visitors touring the royal palace always paused in the Hall of Justice. The room held royal decrees that had changed the kingdom, ancient treaties, historic judgments, the silver seal that established the Crown Office of Justice. Yet the object that drew the most attention was the smallest. Inside a simple glass case rested a worn canvas bag. Its faded fabric was patched in several places. The strap had been carefully stitched more than once. It looked as though it belonged to an ordinary traveler. Certainly not to a queen. Children were usually the first to ask, "Why is that old bag here?" Their parents often smiled, waiting for the answer. If Queen Aurelia happened to be visiting the hall that day, she always stepped toward the display herself. She never let anyone else explain it. She rested one hand gently against the glass. "This," she would say, "was everything I owned on the day the world believed I had nothing." The children looked at the little bag with new eyes. Aurelia smiled. "When I carried it, people pitied me. Some laughed. They thought losing my home meant losing my worth." She shook her head softly. "But a person's worth is never measured by what they carry. It's measured by the character they refuse to leave behind." Those words spread far beyond the palace. Teachers repeated them in village schools. Parents whispered them to frightened children. Young servants remembered them whenever life seemed unfair. One spring morning, King Alaric joined Aurelia in the Hall of Justice. He stood quietly beside the display for a long moment. Then he unveiled a new stone inscription above the entrance. Visitors gathered to read it. The words were simple. "A crown should never be given to the richest. It should belong to the one who still chooses integrity after losing everything." The hall fell silent. Aurelia slipped her hand into Alaric's. "You wrote that for me." He smiled. "I wrote it for everyone who believes their circumstances define their future. She leaned her head lightly against his shoulder. "Do you remember the first day you saw me?" "I do. You were giving away fresh bread that should have been yours." She laughed softly. "And you? You looked like an ordinary merchant. I was a terrible disguise." "You were?" They both laughed. It was a quiet, familiar laughter, earned through years of walking beside each other. Outside the palace, children played freely in streets, where justice no longer depended on wealth. Servants entered government offices without fear. No one was condemned without evidence. The kingdom had changed because two people refused to compromise their principles. History remembered the day Aurelia Winter was forced to leave the Hawthorne estate with only a patched canvas bag. The people remembered something far greater. The Alpha King had seen what everyone else overlooked. Not a servant, not an outcast, not a woman with nothing. He saw quiet integrity when no one else was looking. He saw courage without applause. He saw kindness that expected nothing in return. Long before Aurelia ever wore the moon crown, she had already proven she possessed the one thing no crown could ever create: the heart of a queen.